What's up, guys? I'm Josh, and I am the dude who helps Benny with his podcast channel. This is kind of fun. I didn't know that I was going to be doing an intro to an episode today. So today we are doing the podcast episode that we made about a year ago. It's on self-worth. The podcast was called Uncomfortable Couch. So I just kind of wanted to introduce myself so you guys can put a name to a face, because Benny talks about me sometime, and I've been kind of behind the scenes with this guy, but yeah, dude, he's done an amazing job, and it's been cool to be part of the experience. Stop. So tell us about the podcast.
Yeah, it's a really cool one. Today it's a little bit longer. It's self-worth, so it's really good stuff. I listened to it a little bit ago. It's really interesting listening to these again after a year. Those of you that were with us on that journey before, I hope it's fun to kind of go back. Those of you who haven't heard them, you should check them out. Josh does a really good job with them. They're really cool. He's just got a really good way of asking pretty insightful questions that get my mind rolling, and he's really helpful with this channel too for doing some of that stuff behind the scenes. So check it out. It's about self-worth. We're really glad that you've joined us, and thanks again to Josh for all of his help, for everything that he's doing with Deep Space. Subscribe. Feel free to share this with anybody you'd like. We're really glad to have you with us on this journey, and enjoy Self-Worth podcast from Uncomfortable Couch here on Deep Space.
Sweet.
Thanks for being with us, guys. See you soon.
Today's topic is self-worth. In this episode, we discuss the crucial role that self-worth plays in all facets of our lives. We also learn how having low self-worth not only impacts ourselves, but it also affects the way that we view others. Lastly, we talk about what to do if you have low self-worth. Let's go now to our conversation. Okay, so this is the first episode of 5 episodes that we are going to do about relationships. And today we are going to be talking about self-worth. So we've talked before, Ben, how self-worth shows up in communication, it shows up in boundaries, it shows up in basically every facet of relationships. So I thought that was a good place to start out. In the past, you've talked to me about the coin analogy, and I was hoping that you could kind of recap for our listeners what that is.
Yeah, self-worth is a theme that shows up over and over and over with my clients. I see it all the time, just as I trace issues and as I join with people and look for what's going on with them, where their issues are coming from, what they're connected to, sort of looking for roots. Self-worth is a root issue that shows up all the time. So I have a sort of a go-to analogy that I use with people a lot, because I think that there's a lot of what goes on with self-worth is actually about misconception. People that just don't realize what they're worth, their value, just as human beings. So I have a metaphor that I try to use a lot, which is the metaphor of the coin. I think that the way that many people, maybe all of us to a degree, try to determine what we're worth is we look for the reaction of others towards us when they see us. So we kind of look to other humans as a sort of mirror.
As a sounding board?
A sounding board's a good way to put it, but I think it goes even further. It's not just how people respond to us in conversation or to our ideas, but to our very essence, to ourselves. So sort of like the analogy of the coin, we're like a coin I picture a busy New York street or something, and we're the coin that's laying on the ground, and we're two-dimensional, so we can't see which coin we are. So we're looking up into the eyes of the people that are passing us, and we're looking for, when they catch us, when they see us, do they stop? Do they reach down? Do they keep us? Do they value us? Do they prize us? Or do they look at us and keep walking? So what ends up happening for a lot of people is that they experience some degree of people have seen me and they've just kept going. They didn't stop. They didn't pick me up. They didn't seem to care. Maybe I was vulnerable. Maybe I showed my true self. And maybe people walked away from me because of it. When they see me, they've left me. And they learn from that. They learn that, well, I must be a penny. If no one's picking me up, I'm definitely not a quarter. I'm definitely not, silver dollar or whatever. But the truth is, the way that I think is what's actually happening to those coins. I'm a big fan of The Simpsons, and I remember the episode where Montgomery Burns has the $1 trillion bill, and it's meant to go to some made-up European country. We're actually more like that $1 trillion bill. We have limitless value. We have limitless worth just in and of ourselves implicitly. But we're in that plane with Montgomery Burns flying over the Caribbean or something, and we fly out of the plane accidentally, and we float down and we land in a village of Aborigines or whatever. That's us. And what they do with that $1 trillion bill teaches us about our value. They don't know what it's worth. And so they roll it up and stuff it in the bottom of their shoes to keep their toes warm. They use it to start fires at the fire. They stuff it in the cracks in the hut to keep the wind out. And that $1 trillion bill learns, I must be a penny. I must have the value of a scrap of paper. The truth is that the $1 trillion bill is amongst people who don't have any sort of scale or concept of the true value of the bill. If they knew that this would completely revolutionize, this is worth more than their entire economy, they would treat it differently, but they just don't know. And I think for most people, we don't realize, we don't know how much we're really worth to each other as human beings. Just implicitly, we struggle to understand the concept of true implicit value. So we end up seeing $1 trillion bills and stuffing them into our shoes. Walking by and seeing it on the ground and just mistaking it for a scrap of paper and continuing to walk by, that has an impact on the self-worth of the $1 trillion bill. It thinks, well, I must be a piece of paper. I must be a penny. I must not have value. And we learn that, and it's hard not to.
So pragmatically, we see $1 trillion bill and we stuff it in our shoes to warm our toes. Right. What does that look like on a daily basis?
Well, think about it. Think about how you view humans in general. Right? So often, I'm guilty of this myself. I try not to, especially in my practice. I'm very conscious of it. But just socially or personally, just when you meet a person and you kind of have a sense of like, I'll probably never talk to him again. I probably won't have much of a relationship with this person. Or
I've been guilty of that.
Right? And it's unintentional. It's not like you're not doing it from a super judgmental place. It's not like you're looking at a person saying, you are worthless. You're just sort of making an assessment of this person probably won't be a part of my life, and I really just don't care that much. And it can really happen, though. More dramatic examples are when you see someone who is hurting or is vulnerable or is needy, and we look at that and we go, ugh, I don't want to get close to that need. Like that, if I start feeding into that, they're going to start depending on me. I'm going to get a part of that system, and I don't want anything to do with that. And so I will look that need in the face and just say, go find it someplace else. Which we do that as there are some healthy boundaries that we have to respect, and self-worth has a lot to do with boundaries and our own boundaries, but at the same time, we've got to just recognize and we have to know that when we do that, we are communicating something to those people. You're just not worth it to me.
From your experience talking to people in your practice, how would you say that self-worth ties into relationships?
Yeah, it's a huge part of relationships. I think there's two sides to it. There's what do you value in me, and then there's what do I value in myself. How much do I value myself? And then how much does my partner value me, or how much do I value my partner? So it's sort of a two-way street in a sense. If I don't value myself, if I don't see myself as having implicit worth, in fact, if I wonder if I have any worth at all, and if I've got the insecurity that can come with that, I'm way more likely to put up with a bunch. I'm way more likely to have way lower expectations. Expectations of who I can reasonably expect to be with, and the quality of treatment that I should expect from those people, from my partners. If I don't value myself, it's really difficult to expect that anyone else would. And so people with low self-esteem, low self-worth, will often find themselves in relationships that aren't equal, that they struggle with equality, and it's partially just because they're not valuing themselves. And so my partner doesn't value me either. So I think you can see it a lot. You see it a lot in boundaries. Again, I know that we're going to talk about boundaries later, but if I don't value myself, why would I expect you to respect that I've set this boundary, I've set this expectation? Why would I ever expect you to listen to me in that? The other thing too, if I don't value myself, there's ways we talked about with overregulation, underregulation. There's ways that can show up in both ways. It has an effect on those, and those things have an effect on it. If I am an overregulator and I don't value myself, I don't have a sense of my implicit worth, when I have feelings, I'm way more likely to just tell them to shut up, get over it, and move on. right? I don't handle that with care. I don't expect you to handle it with care. I'm not going to ask you for support with it. Why would I? I don't even value it. I look at that stuff that's emanating from inside of me, and I look at it and just say, it's junk. It's bad. It's a reflection of my failure. Instead of looking at it as something that I have a right, or not even a right, but it would be right to reach out to you with it. If I'm an underregulator and I don't have a sense of my worth, then you can see underregulators that protest that. They're so upset about that. They don't see themselves as having a whole lot of value. And when you don't see it either, they get mad about it. They protest it. It's this weird both and, where I both dislike myself and I am really upset with people for proving that back to me, to showing that back to me and not disproving it for me. And so underregulators can get really messy with that feeling of, I don't feel like I have a lot of worth, and I really don't like that.
People with low self-worth, how have you seen that they project that onto their partner in the relationship?
Projection happens anytime. It can happen all the time with any time that you've got a deeply held emotion. You could see it projected onto your partner. You don't value yourself, and you assume they don't value you either. If you don't value yourself, you could project that onto them, where you really don't value them as much. Valuing yourself and having a sense of your worth is a core fundamental reality. It goes all the way. It's extremely deep. And if it's not right, if I'm out of tune with that, I don't have a sense of what I'm worth, that changes the way I see my partner. It changes the way that I expect my partner to see me. It changes everything. It changes my perspective on me and my perspective on the world, where I fit into it. And it's messy. It messes up. It's like having a fracture at your core, and everything above it, at your foundation, it's like having a cracked foundation. Everything above it can start to get off, and that kind of thing shows up in relationships all the time.
Yeah, I remember studying a lot about that, especially in personality psychology, actually, at university, just talking about how people can be triggered in relationships. Mm-hmm. One, you will say something, and your partner will freak out, and it's because that is somehow connected to some kind of wound that they had back in childhood, and that sounds like stereotypical and hackneyed.
Well, it is pretty stereotypical because it's super common. The difference, the important point with self-worth is that if you have a wound in that area, it's just really, really deep. It's close to your core. It's close to it's your sense of who you are, and you make sense of the world from that. And so if you remind me that I don't feel good there, you trigger that by the way that you treat me. All of a sudden, we've gone from a conversation about you didn't show up for coffee, and I'm having a conversation about, like, what am I worth in the world? And that's two very different things, and that can get pretty intense.
You know, a lot of people just are not attentive to relationships, and whether that's intentional or unintentional, they just aren't attentive. Either that, or the people who have hurt them in the past, maybe they aren't around, maybe they've died, maybe it's parents, maybe it's old friends from high school that they've lost contact with, whatever. You end up with this reality of a bunch of wounded people walking around, and whether they know they're wounded or they don't know they're wounded, maybe the wounds are fresh from a week ago, or maybe it's all the way back from elementary school when you got picked on by a bunch of kids or whatever. What do you say to a wounded person?
Yeah, I think the best thing I know what to do with that is to do something different than what they've experienced. Value them, listen to them, care about it. One of the best things that you can do for another person is show up and just remain present. Just be with them. When they're sharing their vulnerabilities and they're talking about this thing that they're not even at peace with, they're rejecting it as they're telling you, but they're so desperate for somebody to come alongside and just say, would you just see this, and speak something other than judgment into it, grace, some sort of acceptance. So the very best thing that you can do is just care. Just treat it like it matters. That's the best way to show someone that they have worth, to undo the treatment that they've been through that created that perspective for them, that they have no worth. The best way to do it is to treat them like they have worth. For someone that would not necessarily know that they have worth, I've had people in my office that have literally argued with me and have tried to tell me that they don't, and that they want to tell me that their worth is determined solely based on whether or not they behave appropriately, that they do the thing. If they do good things, then they're a good person, they have value. If they do bad things, they're a bad person, they have no value. What I try to tell them, this is just sort of a road that I've gone down several times with clients before. As a human being, we all have implicit value. If you think about it, you could think of it simply in terms of biologically. The miraculous nature of your body, your ability. Look at your eyeball, for example. The amount of information your eye can process. At any one point, I can look all around the room. I can take in all kinds of information, visually, depth, color, with zero buffering. If I had a camera that could do that and that could store that amount of memory like that as quickly as that, and that degree of definition, that would be like the nicest camera on the face of the earth. And we would value that camera. We would look at that camera and we'd say, that is actually really solid. These microphones in front of us, they pick up all kinds of sound, right? My ear, so much better. Right, and so these mics are nice. This is valuable. This is a good thing. I look at this like I wouldn't throw it away. I wouldn't look at it like it was stupid. I wouldn't judge it. And so to be able to then take the camera and the mic and my eye and my ear, synthesize that information coming in, and then into my brain. Think even just your skin cells, your fingernails, your hair follicles, your body in general will heal itself. It is unlike anything else in the world. I mean, obviously, the animal kingdom will do very similar things, but just the biology of the miraculous makeup of your physical body is super valuable in and of itself. If we had a machine that could do anything like that, we would look at that like that is on the top of performance, what it's capable of doing. And then you look inside of that, and that body is animated then by a central nervous system that's part of the body. Right, and so your brain and your nerves and your feelings, the electrical impulses that fire at remarkably miraculous speeds, and how the whole thing is animated by this system that is far beyond any supercomputer. If we had the world's the missile defense computer at NORAD, it would pale in comparison to even a small percentage of your brain. That's an amazing thing. We would value that computer. We don't necessarily value. We look at a brain that's taking in all this information, that's animating this body, and we just say, yeah, I'm not really into that. And then you look beneath that, and that brain is then connected to an entire psychology, a psyche, a combination of memory, of emotion, feelings that animate the brain, that engage with the brain and animate this physical body that in and of itself is a miracle. Then you take this series of emotions and memories and experiences that are all implicitly stored in this like supercomputer. That's a miraculous thing that you don't see in the animal kingdom in the same way. Our ability to construct a worldview, construct an inner world with our minds, and to see where we fit into the world, that is an incredible thing. And not only that, but it's incredibly capable. I think one of the things that moves us and that we value is when we see capability, like the capability to experience extreme pain or extreme joy. When we see something capable of that, we look at that and go, that matters because of what it's capable of. Like I personally have a hard time with the idea of like killing animals that can feel familial connections with each other, right? Like hunting and killing the mom deer, Bambi, right? Mm-hmm. Right? And part of what makes that extra powerful is the power of that capability that animal can sense that connection. We have that in an extreme degree, right? So we have this unbelievable body that's animated like a nesting doll, is animated by this unbelievable central nervous system that's then animated by this psychology that's then, in my opinion, my belief, is then animated even further beneath that, a nesting doll even at the core of that, with a slice of eternity. that there's something inside of each of us that's beyond the physical realm.
For those people out there who feel like they don't have any self-worth, how would you engage with them? And does that tie into some kind of concept like what you were talking about of the nesting dolls, let's say with, like what you said, the slice of eternity? Or is there some kind of concept of God involved there, in your opinion?
I think so. My opinion, definitely. What I do with people that are in that situation is kind of like we talked about. I do two things. There's two levels of it. One is experiential, and so there's an explicit and there's an implicit. The explicit telling is kind of what I just, that whole, you have this series of nesting doll miracles that construct this you that is totally unique. It's totally individual. There's no one like you. You are the only one. And so sometimes I'll just tell people that. That's sort of just like, hey, here's some words to hear. And it has marginal value. Sometimes it can have an effect where somebody, I didn't think of it that way.
What about the expression, if everyone is unique, nobody is?
Here's a sort of a tool that I sometimes will show people that have those sorts of questions. If you take a deck of cards, right, and you shuffle that deck up, and you give it a good shuffle, you set that card down, those cards down, you've actually created something in that deck of cards that's never been done before. It's completely and utterly unique. No deck of cards in the history of humanity has ever been in the order that deck that you just shuffled up is in, ever. It's almost mathematically certain. The reason for that is that the odds that the deck would be in that order are 1 in 52 times 51 times 50 times 49 times 48. That's a number that's like, I can't remember exactly, but I think it starts with an 8, and I think it's like 80 digits long. 1 in 80 digits long number. I mean, it's massive. And the odds of that are absolutely insane. Now, humans are the same way. We all have a king of clubs. We all have a two of hearts. We all have these same functions, these same experiences. We all have a dad, whether that means we met our dad or we didn't. We all have a human father. We all have a socioeconomic setup. We all have experiences with peers. We all have all these different factors that are all somewhat, we all have similar, at least, placeholders for experience, which we have in common, and your siblings have even more in common with you. But no deck is in that order. That is implicitly unique. Yeah, you got a two of clubs, so do I. Mine might be the 15th card in, yours is the 25th card in, and that's very different. Yes, we have the same components, but we're different. So I do try to tell people, explicitly try to tell people about their uniqueness, about their value, just because of who they are. Implicitly, I try to show them. That to me has everything to do with God. I try to treat people the way I believe that they were designed to be treated. The coolest thing about the presence of God in my worldview is that it animates even further beneath all of those different levels of nesting dolls. It breathes life into each one. It says that each one of them is intentional. Each one of them is made on purpose to be exactly what they are. And that written through all of that is made by a being who values them. And so if you can then sync with, I'm created, and I don't think that you have to necessarily have a spiritual worldview to pull that off. It's just the spiritual worldview gives you this final, all-encompassing, tie it all together level, a layer of levels, which basically says, I am made by a God who values me and loves me in my construction, as in that each layer of me has a layer of the miraculous, a layer of the completely unheard of elsewhere, and that was done on purpose. And that value, if I can hold that, and if I don't have the relationship, if I don't have God as a part of that spirituality, at the very least, can I look at myself and say, I have value, regardless if I was regularly picked up on the street as a coin, or if people looked at me and they walked on. Is that a reflection of my value, or is that a reflection of something else? I think the most awful thing that's ever happened in humanity, the most difficult thing that we face as humans, is that there are so many of us that we have rendered ourselves common. We think that there's so many of us that when we see one, you run into a miracle 500 times a day, it stops feeling like a miracle.
So lastly, Ben, if someone's wanting to learn more about self-worth or be directed to a valuable resource on the topic, what would you recommend to them?
Right now, well, a couple things. One, the best resource that you could ever find for worthiness and self-worth is actually not a resource in a sense, but in a sense it very much is just to be around people who value you. Find people in your life who you know look at you and see you and value you for who you are, that aren't looking at you saying, when you perform effectively, then you have value for me. When you're providing something to me, then you have value to me. But the best resource for this is to be around other people, because value is communicated and passed on experientially.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, value is communicated and passed on experientially. You experience value. You get picked up on the street and you say, oh, wow, it must be $1, right? You get around people who do value. That's the best way for it to happen. If you're looking for resources that are more, to help you to learn about value, if you're looking for resources to read about it, right now the researcher, and we'll probably talk about her in a lot of the podcasts because she's kind of killing it right now. She's at the top of the world of psychology in a lot of ways, is Brene Brown. All of her books have an undertone. She calls it worthiness. How worthy are you as a human being? For her, she is studying the effect of that on the whole human, and it's powerful. It's extreme. It affects just about everything, every layer of the human being. If you layer into yourself shame, self-loathing, you strap in, because you've got all kinds of issues coming. It will connect to just about anything. If you want to do good work for yourself, if you want to look into your own life and say, how can I make some changes? Where should I start? That's your therapy for free. You want to start somewhere, that's where your therapist is probably going to go. How do you view yourself? And Brene Brown does a really good job of honing in on that.
That concludes this episode of The Uncomfortable Couch. Join us next time when Ben and I discuss how the health of a relationship is directly connected to the health of your communication styles. I'm your host, Josh Munyon, thanking you for joining us here on The Uncomfortable Couch. We'll see you next time.